Doing theory is hard. And it's especially hard when you are coming from an applied background. Throughout your studies, you didn't spend a lot of time being exposed to this like pure academic theorizing. Today I wanted to take some time to kind of showcase how I learned to work with theory and how I found my way around theorizing. So when you're new to theorizing, it can really feel like searching for a needle in a haystack. But there are some things that made a huge impact on how I can engage with theory. How I find the papers to read, how I manage these papers without, going absolutely insane by the sheer volume of them, and also how I take notes on them, and then at the end how these all come together in making something coherent. Now, of course, given, the few minor things, which make up about half of the job when you're an academic, I won't be able to go into detail on everything. I want this video to be a bit more like a map. I want to kind of like give you some breadcrumbs or like some directions to start looking at. And I'll try to throw links into the description about anything I mentioned so you can like follow up from that point onwards. That's about the plan for today. How I find papers, how I manage these papers, how I take notes on them, how I write using them. Okay, so step number 1 is of course finding papers. I recommend using a search engine for this. You can either do Google Scholar or Scopus or Web of Science. These are the 3 big ones. My recommendation usually is find a few keywords for your research question and then look for reviews. And I would also filter on figure out the good journals in your field and filter on reviews that show up in those good journals. From there on, when you have a review or 2 that you are satisfied with, then comes the step when you snowball. And what I mean by snowballing is that you open your review and literally just take an entire session. Like this can take an entire morning. Open a review on one side of your screen, start reading, and then any paper that is related to your topic, just open in a new tab and then save it for later. And by the end, you read a few reviews and then you should have a good list of other papers that might be related to your topic. And my recommendation here is always to be a bit more liberal with saving stuff, because you can always throw stuff out for later. But if you miss important papers because, I don't know, by the title or by the context of the review, they didn't seem too interesting, that might bite you in the ass later. So just, save all the stuff that looks interesting, and then we can proceed on to step 2. Okay, the thing that I think everyone should have in academia is a reference manager. There's cheering coming from outside. They also want you to have a reference manager. So the point of a reference manager is to keep track of all the papers that you read or need to read and to kind of have them all in one place, from where you can export them into bibliography or you can cite them directly. It just makes your life so much easier. You can create little collections where you can put your papers, so you don't have to stick to folders, because papers can lead in multiple collections, but not in multiple folders. It's just so nice. I recommend Zotero to everyone I meet. Some people like Mendeley. I don't like Mendeley because it's run by Elsevier. I know I recommended Scopus. I know, I'm learning Web of Science, I'm gonna leave Scopus, it's fine. So just go Zotero, it's really nice, it's open source, it's free, gets the job done really well, and now the new update actually looks quite pretty. Learn how to really work with that. It also has an extension which lets you save papers from the browser directly into your Zotero collections. So then with one click you can just go from a PDF in a browser into a PDF and a full bibliography entry in your Zotero collection, and then from there on you can do all your things with Zotero on the paper. And I also recommend, there is a plugin called Zotero Reading List. I'll link it in the description. It's basically a Zotero extension which adds an extra column to your view, which is a reading list, which is you can mark stuff as to read or read or in progress or not reading, and it also stars new items, which will come in handy when you are working in hundreds of papers and you want to keep track of okay, what do I still need to read, what do I need to process further, what's new, what is something that I want to keep for later but it's not useful here. All of that gets handled by the reading list plugin, so I really, really, really recommend that. Okay, now you have a bunch of papers, all of which are somewhat relevant to your topic, and they are filed nicely into a reference manager. But now it's time to actually get to reading. So this is a bit dependent on your discipline, but what I've found works really well is reading with a question in mind. If you have a research question, reading papers with that specific research question in mind, and then thinking how this connects to that research, how this paper that I'm reading now connects to the research question, helps a lot in kind of making sense of these papers. Because you will read a lot of stuff, you will read a lot of different argumentations, at different levels of detail. So constantly thinking like, okay, how does this relate to my question? How does this relate to my question? Can be kind of like a North Star for your reading to just help you separate the signal from the noise in some of these papers. Because not everything is going to be relevant for your specific question, but again, needle in a haystack. You're looking for the stuff that is relevant for you. If you are at the beginning, like I was, and you are really just like trying to figure out a research question, like get a feel for the literature, a good question to constantly keep asking yourself is, what is the author trying to say, show, do here? And this can go for empirical papers, like showing like, okay, so what exactly are we measuring? Or like, why are we measuring? This is an even better question. And that can like constantly asking like, okay, what's the author trying to do here, is a really good way to kind of keep yourself on track while reading and kind of help you develop that meta perspective around literature. And also, if you are using Zotero, then you can just like set up a sync with their applications on iPad and now also Android, which is excellent. I highly, highly recommend it. It basically allows you to use your little device as a reader, and then you can highlight using the pencil, and then you can draw, and all of your highlights sync to your laptop. I basically constantly just read using this. So I just save a bunch of papers on my laptop and then sync them over to my little trusty little iPad, and then I can even walk around while reading, which is great. Oh yeah, and one last piece about highlighting, speaking of, is that I think highlighting is useful, but it shouldn't be like an end-all be-all. So I would highlight stuff that catches your attention or stuff that surprises you. I think that's a really, really good proxy for what is worth kind of noting down. And I also use highlights to kind of highlight important pieces of the text. So when I look at the text later, I read the highlight and I read the context before and after it to kind of get up to speed with it. So if there's a paper which, I don't know, does a big literature review on the topic, and you're only interested in a section of that, I would highlight a few key findings from there to make it easier to find them later. But other than that, don't go overboard with the highlighting and don't overthink it either. It's not that deep. All right, so by now you have found your papers, downloaded them nicely into a reference manager, read them, made some notations on it, or highlighted some of them, and now it's time to take notes on them. There is a great blog post that we put together for Tilburg Science Hub with Stefan, a good friend of mine. So I recommend that about note-taking systems in academia. It's just, you technically can get by without a note-taking app. Just don't. It's just so much nicer when you step out of the Word or Google Doc lands of word processors, which are not meant for note-taking. They are meant for producing documents at the end of it. I really, really recommend just grabbing a note-taking app that you like. It can be Notion, it can be Obsidian, it can be OneNote, it can be whatever you like. Just have a note-taking app and then work on that. My notes of choice is, I'm a big Markdown guy. I use Obsidian. I've been using Obsidian for 2-3 years now, and I've gone through making it super complex and then keeping it super bare bones. I use it both for my academic life and also for my personal life. This is where I manage all of these YouTube videos, for example. Obsidian also has a great plugin called Obsidian Citations. I'll also link to that in the description. And what it does is it allows you to connect your Zotero library, all the stuff that you saved, into your Obsidian notes. Then you can automatically generate notes for papers. You can cite immediately in like a nice format. I highly recommend setting this up. So there's a Twitter thread that I really, really like when it comes to academic note-taking. So it's by a guy named Ilya Shibanov, who went huge on academic Twitter by kind of revolutionizing or like stirring up a lot of the old workflows of that are like engraved into academia, like providing a lot of very, very good information of how to use the tool for the job when it comes to academic work. And there is a thread that he made about literature review. Now, for a long while, I tried to come up with my own system on how to manage these notes and how to read papers, turn them into notes, and like how this whole thing should work. And it just never felt right. And at a certain point, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and then she was just like, yeah, but like at the end of the day, you will just have to do something, right? And then I just decided like, okay, there's this guy I like how he works, so I will just take his system one-to-one and start doing it. And then after 3 months, I can revisit and then figure it out from there. Sorry, my recording session got interrupted by a cute FaceTime with my mom. So if the frame is different, that's fine. There are 4 main types of notes that you're gonna use. There are source notes, which are mapping like one-to-one to a paper. So one paper, one source note. This is not the PDF, and this does not have all the content of the paper. This is more to identify and keep track of the papers in your note-taking app. The point of this is to kind of be able to open it and kind of get up to speed with the paper if you haven't touched it in a good while. So what I do there is I have a little summary of like what the authors are trying to do, the kind of whether it's an empirical paper, what the core idea is, how are they testing, what's the point. I have the abstract in there, alongside the kind of like the main big deal about the paper, like kind of the reason why I got published. If it's a theoretical paper, you know, maybe like a screen grab of like a theoretical diagram or a few lines, but very brief. This is not meant to have the information of the paper. This is meant to identify the paper and get you up to speed with the paper as fast as possible. Then there are collection notes. This is where you put all the ideas from all the papers regarding a certain topic. So the whole core idea here is, instead of collecting the contents and the ideas according to source, you are collecting them according to the topic they relate to. So, you know, just because two things come from the same paper doesn't mean that they have to live at the same place. So if a paper makes an argument on topic A and topic B, the two arguments from the paper are gonna live in topic A's collection and topic B's collection. So for example, I work a lot with co-petition, which is the simultaneous competition and collaboration between market players. So I just have a bunch of collection notes on different dimensions of co-petition. So when I read the paper, I have all of those open, and then I can just chuck any idea and always highlight the original source where it come from in your collection notes. But I can just chuck any idea into the collection where I want to see them again. And this is kind of the main principle of taking notes like this, is that you put ideas and content to places where you want to see them again. Then the third kind of note is thinking notes. This is where you can put any questions or contradictions or whatever thoughts you have about the papers or about the collection notes or what arose while thinking about the literature. Just chuck them in there. These are very fluid, they grow a lot, they can have any questions. Be super, super unfiltered. Any question that feels like it's a dumb question or anything, just throw it in there. And then, you know, you can always delete stuff later, but write down everything. That's how you get good ideas. And then, of course, the last type of note that you will encounter is like an outline note or a draft. This is where if you have a research question, you can just start kind of like making an outline and populating it with ideas, plucking stuff from your thinking notes and collection notes to build an argument. My recommendation is to put all of your effort into creating source notes that you actually want to use. So make sure that your source notes are nice and something that you can actually use to catch up with the paper, because collections and thinking notes are meant to be messy and kind of this ever-evolving process. So I started out with one single note for co-petition, and when that grew too big, I just sliced it up according to topics that emerged by just collecting ideas. And this is a very dynamic framework. It's not very pretty, but it's very, very efficient. And it really enabled me to kind of externalize a lot of my thinking around the literature, which goes a really, really long way. And then the last piece of the puzzle is, of course, the writing. And this kind of ties into the drafts that I mentioned in the previous section. I really like outlining stuff in like a few bullet points to kind of provide a bit of structure, and then populating those with ideas and arguments and seeing how stuff relates to each other. So here, when I argue or like take an argument or an idea from a paper, I always link back to the source note. So I omit the collection and the thinking note and go straight to the source. This makes it much closer to the actual text that you're going to be writing at the end. And also, if you read the thread and make these quotables for every paper, like Ilya suggests, the whole idea is that when you are making your source note, you make a little section called a quotable, where you just have a statement that you can quote about this paper. And then basically you can just build a draft by copying and pasting quotables from all of the papers that you read to kind of string them together as an argument. And just like that, by the end of this process, you should have a reasonable outline. Of course, this is a starting point. This is where the actual writing process is going to start, of like looking over these ideas, formulating your arguments, crystallizing it, and really making them clear. But this should be able to get rid of the blank page syndrome that plagues so many of us when it comes to writing academic stuff. I actually made a video about how I learned to use writing to kind of clarify what exactly I'm thinking about a topic. And it came from more or less this framework that, like, when I'm forced to actually put my thoughts onto the paper and try to string together arguments, it just clarifies it nicely. So if this sounds like something you would like to explore, you can check it out over there. Okay, so this is how to theory, or rather how I theory. I have no idea whether this is the correct way or if a correct way even exists. I do think it's highly individual, but I also think that it's very good to have a starting point to start figuring out your own system and what works for you, what doesn't work for you. This is just what worked for me, and it worked for me really, really well. It removed a lot of friction associated with engaging with literature and crafting theory, and it enabled me to come up with proper grounded hypotheses for my own research. So now with this framework, I hope the next step you can take is actually starting the reading and the writing and the note-taking process, which will take some time, and it will probably take more time than you think. For me, it certainly was the case. And if you find yourself always feeling super busy and not really sure where to find the time to do all of the steps that we just discussed, I just happened to make a video about how exactly I can keep an eye on my time. And it's something that I wish I started doing day one of my PhD, but you know, after a year, you live and you learn. So if you want to learn how I manage my time and how I make sure that I'm on the right track, you can check it out over here. That's all for today. I'm gonna see you next time.